I'm Heston Blumenthal, and I run one of the best restaurants in the world. I don't do food in an ordinary way. I think food should be fun. A delicious, spectacular adventure with every bite being a delight to the senses. I want to create meals that people will remember for the rest of their lives.
And tonight, I'm taking a trip to a decade of outrageous excess, the 1980s, when it was all about showing off loads of money, and technology took over the kitchen.
Potato waffle!
I want to rediscover the crazy gadgets and mad food that I loved in my teenage years.
Get out of Dragon Oil!
And see if I can use them to create a brand new feast for today.
Bye, bye, bye.
So throw away your cookbooks. And please don't try this at home. I'm on a mission to make an incredible feast in which I plan to reuse the best mad technology and crazy ideas from the 1980s. This was an extra special time for me because, inspired by the gadgetry and ambition of that decade, I first started to take my own unique approach to cooking.
The 1980s was the me first decade. It was excessive, it was flash, and it was full of cash.
I found the 80s amazing because it was a time when technology and food collided. From slush puppies to nouvelle cuisine, soda streams to microwaves. For the first time, food was taken beyond pots and pans, and I was drawn into a fantastical new world of cooking. Surrounded by ready meals, Pop-Tarts and Monster Munch, and inspired by the raw ambition of the 80s, I gave up the day job, took to the kitchen for the first time, and I've never looked back.
I want to revisit the time when I first discovered my love for cooking and look at the trends, the food, and the technologies that, for me, made the 1980s such an amazing decade.
I've invited 6 guests to get out the hairspray, put on their shoulder pads, and travel back to my youth.
Everything was big, wasn't it? It was big hair, it was big shoulders.
The 80s for us, I know not for anybody else, the first time I had tuna from a tin.
Woo! Food was very simple. A lot of sort of beans on toast, a lot of sort of toasted sandwiches.
Things like Finder's crispy pancakes and Pop-Tarts.
Presumably he's going to try and recreate that weird sort of gadgety culture of the 80s in some way. Don't know how, maybe he'll just get a-ha in with their synthesizers.
To fully transport my guests back to my formative years, I've put together a dining room the way I like to remember the 80s.
This is like Folly's nightclub in Southport in 1983.
Tonight, I'm plugging into some of the mad technology that first got me excited about cooking, to see if I can once again use its magic to create an amazing meal for today. With a yuppie-tastic glass of SodaStream champagne, my ultimate Breville toasted sandwich, a microwave meal made with the show-off ingredient of the 80s, lobster, and inspired by the space shuttle launch, my very own weightless dessert.
I'm going to reinvent the best that the 1980s had to offer, but for today.
Now, to begin my feast in style, I need to take a trip back in time to when it was all about the cash.
I'm on my way to the City of London, the epicentre of Britain in the 80s. This is the place where red braces ruled, where mobile phones were the size of bricks, and where money, money, money was everything. I'm on the trail of the drink that was the essence of that decade, champagne.
Champagne was the drink of choice for the yuppie. Consumption went up by 70% at the start of the 80s, and as city boys traded, champagne sales boomed to 20 million bottles per year.
The thing is, we're not in the 80s anymore. We're not in a boom, we're in a recession. So I was thinking, could I create a champagne for a credit crunch using the SodaStream?
When I was a teenager, this was the piece of kitchen technology that I dreamed of owning. Invented way back in 1903 for butlers to fizz up aristocrats' gin drinks, the soda stream simply carbonates water into pop. But in the 1980s, it was a kind of kitchen black magic that I loved.
So my idea is to take some cheap wine, stick it in here, fizz it up, and see if the bankers of today can taste the difference. To complete my 80s experiment, I need an iconic 80s wine, Blue Nun. This is going to form the basis of my SodaStream champagne. It's time to get busy with the fizzy. Champers, anyone? Actually tastes all right. It certainly doesn't taste like I've taken Blue Nun and stuck it in a soda stream. This is certainly more fun than those dodgy cordials you used to get to put in the soda streams. I wish I'd known this when I was a kid.
But the question is, can Blue Nun in a soda stream fool today's city types into believing it's champagne?
So have a sip and then swap. Taste that one. Now, which one of these do you think is Blue Nun?
No idea.
That one. Second one.
That one. That's the Blue Nun.
No.
Yeah.
I prefer that, actually, to this one. I don't know which one's the real one.
That one is Blue Nun.
It's not, is it really?
Yeah.
I'm going to go and buy some. Marvellous.
Amazingly, over half the people preferred the Blue Nun.
I thought that was amazing. The fact that Blue Nun in a soda stream can actually masquerade as champagne was just incredible. And you know, this really, champagne sums up the 80s, the decade of opulence and excess. And I need to encapsulate all of that in my starter. But I'm not just going to stop at the champagne. So I've managed to make one of the things that the Red Brace Brigade loved in the 80s. And now I'm going to try to make the other. Loads of money.
To go with my champers, I'm making edible money from sushi. This is perfect because in the 80s, sushi was expensive and very flash. To begin, I mix some kombu seaweed with sugar, salt and rice wine vinegar. Next, I cool some cooked sushi rice to which I add the now fermented kombu and wine mixture.
In Britain, sushi only really took off in the 80s, and it took off big time. The first Michelin-starred sushi restaurant was in London in the 80s, but only for those who had loads of money. It was so expensive.
To my blended rice, I add dried seaweed mixed with egg yolk, dried tuna belly and wasabi. I flatten my rice and add to a sheet of nori seaweed. On top of this, I add some fromage blanc with a bit of horseradish. Then I add trout roe washed in rice wine and use a sushi mat to fold into a wedge shape.
OK, so it's just about finished, but that does not yet look like a wedge of money, does it? But this here certainly does. My very own edible money.
I've printed my own currency onto rice paper, which I wrap around my sushi wedge.
So now I'm all wedged up. Loads of money!
So I've got the cash, but I still need my bubbly. This time, instead of Blue Nun, though, I'm using sake, a traditional Japanese wine that will go well with the sushi.
OK, here we go. So now for the fun bit. So there is my sake bubbly. But I don't want to serve it like this.
I've got something a little more 80s in mind.
So here is my bubbly sake served in a mobile phone. Hello? Yeah, yeah. Seal that deal. Nice one. Cheers.
Edible money stuffed with dried tuna flakes, wasabi and sushi rice. Sake champagne made in a soda stream. 80s extravagance at its best. I'm going to be watching from the kitchen to see how the diners get on with my filthy rich food.
Thank you.
This is insane.
Oh, no way.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have something rather special in your mobile phone, our 80s bubbly. If you'd like to have a little sip through the straw, not too much.
That was sort of like champagne, but not quite so edgy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I think this is lovely, genuinely.
But yeah, that's good. I could have a pint of that if need be.
Eat my head.
I don't feel right eating Heston.
It's slightly disconcerting, actually.
Greed is good.
It really is. Greed is delicious.
Sell, darling, sell.
It is like couture food. This is a one-off thing. We are eating like, you know, it's like Princess Diana's wedding dress.
Get out of dragon oil.
Partly it was really delicious, partly it felt good just because it's beyond the realms of possibility normally to eat tiny little rose eggs wrapped in paper. I can't, if that's the starter, I don't know where this is going to go.
So my City Boy starter has been a success. Next, I'm taking an adventure even further into my teenage memories by trying to reinvent one of my favourite dishes of the time and make my ultimate toasted sandwich.
Look at that. I love it when a plan comes together.
I'm on an adventure back to my formative years to see if I can use the mad technology that I loved in the 80s to create an amazing feast for today. And next, I'm taking a legendary kitchen gadget that I really loved.
The 1980s saw the birth of loads of new, exciting food technologies. But there was one piece of kit that was just brilliant because it got everyone and anyone cooking: the Breville sandwich maker.
As I grew up in the 80s, an army of gadgets started to conquer my kitchen. Shiny new gizmos such as the kitchen whiz, electric knife and of course the toasting machine transformed my kitchen into a space-age wonderland. I was seduced by the potential the toasting machine offered for both crazy fillings and the experience of having my mouth burnt by molten hot cheese. Whilst I might now have moved on to bigger and better things, when it comes to pure snack food indulgence, you don't get much better than the toasted sandwich.
So for my starter, I wanted to capture this spirit of experimentation and create the ultimate toasted sandwich.
In true 80s style, I've assembled a crack squad of experts and have come to my experimental workshop. Our mission? To try and turn back the clock to a time when toasties ruled.
I want to make the ultimate 1980s toasted sandwich. Now here, I've got the Breville toasted sandwich recipe book. And there, I've got a load of toasted sandwich makers, and I've got a warehouse full of power tools.
For my ultimate toasted sandwich, I want to make the ultimate toasted sandwich machine, and that means going large.
So here is the ultimate toasted sandwich maker. Look at that. I love it when a plan comes together. Now, I've picked 4 recipes that have really caught my eye from this book. And they are ham and cheese, mushroom pizza, sweet and sour pork, and for the grand finale, curried banana.
I've had 2 giant loaves custom made for my machine. My idea is to try and mix together a load of different 80s toasty recipes into one massive sandwich and hopefully get inspiration for the perfect filling combination.
I've picked these 4 because I thought I'd go for 2 slightly more common ones and 2 that are just a bit more radical. I'm hoping to really spark off some of those classic 80s food menus. I think this is why Breville's are so popular in the 80s, because you just bunged everything in.
Okay?
Yep.
Yep.
I know this might be the most extreme toasting machine in the world, but it has brought back all those childhood toasty making memories. You had no idea how it was going to turn out, and that was part of the beauty of making a toasty. Wow, look at that.
But what about the thing I most remember about the toasted sandwich? The molten hot inside.
Anything over 65 and you can burn your mouth. In true Breville style. it's napalm inside.
But regardless of the danger,
It's time to try the biggest toasty in the world.
so does the answer to the perfect toasty flavour lie within my giant sarnie? There isn't anything that this 80s cookbook didn't suggest that you could put into a toasty, from scallops in a white wine sauce to the one we're trying, curried bananas.
Not sure about the creativity behind that one.
But for all the strangeness of sweet and sour pork,
It's okay. It's just not what you'd expect to find in a toasty.
there is, however, only one clear winner.
I think I've got to grips with the good and the bad of the toasty. The bad, curry banana. The good is definitely ham and cheese. But I love it when the cheese gets all stringy and gooey. And it's not stringy and gooey in here.
I'm returning to my experimental lab because for my ultimate toasty, I need something a little special in the cheese department.
I want to try and make the stringiest cheese ever. I'd read that in order to make cheese stringy, what you need to do is knead it like a dough. Because as you knead and stretch, the protein strands become more compact and they get more aligned, so they're kind of in the same direction, which means it then becomes more elastic and stringier. Apparently. Oh, oh. That's pretty damn stretchy, isn't it? Right, the cheeses are at their stringiest right around their melting point.
So how about increasing the temperature of the cheese?
I think we might have busted the 3 metre. It seems to me that the kneading of the cheese is really important. The more you knead it, the more elastic it becomes. Temperature as well. So we're going to try some cheese strings because they must have been kneaded as part of the process. That's what makes them stringy in the first place.
Cheese strings are still 100% cheese, but they've been processed to form a really rubbery texture. I'm heating them in a water bath to break them down even further. But the question is, just how far can a cheese string stretch?
All right, I'm at the wall. Come on, can we reach the other end? Hey! Hey!
So I found that the key to super stringy cheese is both how hot you make the mixture and how many times you fold it while it's warm.
Now to put together my ultimate 1980s toasty. So, softened butter.
I've made the decision that instead of quantity, I'm going to go for quality by not making the biggest, but the tastiest toasty ever.
To make the outside of my toasty more crisp, I've cut some sheets of something called brick. It's like phyllo, but it's got a finer crunch.
The biggest problem with a normal toasty is that the bread takes twice as long as the filling to cook, so it creates a molten hot interior.
So what I've decided to do is toast the bread without the filling. You'll be thinking, well, how do you get the bulgy bits? Aha. For this. It's a piece of sponge wrapped in cling film.
I put the sponge in as a filling in my toasty. This allows me to cook the bread without superheating the filling. Once done, I just remove the sponge.
So here I've got a perfectly crisp casing for my toasty. And now I'm going to fill it with these ingredients.
First, some tomato ketchup.
I've got some sliced button mushrooms.
Next, some onion and black truffle puree.
Next, some pieces of streaky bacon. So for the ham, I'm using a particular type of ham from Extremadura in Spain. And they're acorn-fed pigs, very rare, the most unbelievable ham in the world.
Then some braised belly of suckling pig.
Now the thing that's really going to send this into 1980s turbo drive, sliced black truffles. Right, so now to make what I think is the most important part of this toasty, the cheese filling.
I start by adding white wine and lemon juice to a hot pan. I may have found the stringiest cheese to be cheese strings, but they just aren't gourmet enough for my special toasty. So instead, I'm using a mix of Gruyere and Comté cheeses, but I'm putting it through the same mixing and heating process that made the cheese strings just so stretchy.
That is stringy. So I'll leave that to cool, and that is going to form cheese slices to put inside the toasties.
Once it's cooled, I add my super stringy cheese slice to the sandwich.
Close the toastie up.
I then reseal my toastie with some more brick pastry.
So that is now ready to go back in the toastie machine. In true 1980s style, this toastie is going to be turbocharged.
Right, now to begin my ultimate 80s snack experience. Before the toastie, I need to start with a drink, and for me there is only one, Slush Puppy. To act as a palate cleanser and to have a little fun with my guests, I've replaced the normal sweet syrup flavours.
This does not smell like ordinary slush puppies.
With a beetroot, gazpacho and a black truffle one.
That is so nice.
It's really strangely nice.
The longer we go into this, it does start to feel like it's 1984.
Oh, it's very convincing, yeah.
Then it's time to reveal my 3 Michelin-starred toasted sandwich.
It's the present toaster of a giant.
It's just 2 triangles of toast. The inside's got to work. It has got to work. It's got to be the complete contrast of what this looks like. The wow factor has to come from the surprise compared to the appearance.
Oh. It's so gorgeous.
I bet they didn't taste like this back in the day.
Well, 3 types of ham. Who knew there were 3 types of ham?
Jamilia's got the first... She's got string.
I want to be able to stand up.
Oh, look at this.
It was phenomenal. It was lovely.
But it was such a fun meal to eat as well, especially, you know, having the cheese and stretching it, and, you know, it was just... I really feel like a kid again.
In the 80s, this was sort of all I ever ate, was toasties. First half of the 80s, we didn't have a Breville, so we had to improvise by pushing 2 irons together. That really just showed what a toastie could be. I could have 6 or 7 of those, easy.
So my starters worked, and next I'm going even madder by trying to combine the flashiest ingredient of the 80s with one of its coolest gadgets. I'm trying to cook a lobster in a coffee percolator.
I have never done this before.
I'm on an adventure back to the 1980s to try and reinvent my favourite elements of that mad decade for today. Now for my main course, I want to push even further into the food memories of my formative years. When it came to food, there was one meal that defined the 80s, the power lunch. In the UK, as wealth trebled and working hours doubled, relaxing lunches were for wimps. Instead, it was all about sealing the deal with food. Smoked salmon, caviar and lobster were seen as the perfect way to flash the cash. Kitchen technology quickly adapted to this demand for instant gratification, with one machine in particular becoming the ultimate power lunch gadget, the microwave.
The 80s was all about life in the fast lane. Everything was, I want it now, now, now. And that led to the growth, massively popular growth, of the microwave.
It was discovered by chance by an American engineer in the 40s who was standing in front of a radar when the chocolate bar in his pocket melted and led him to invent the microwave oven.
This piece of kit became so massively popular in the 80s. People thought you could and should cook everything in a microwave. And by that, I really do mean everything. And this recipe really caught my eye. It's from a 1980s microwave cookbook. This is a classic French lobster thermidor cooked in a microwave. Why on earth would you cook lobster in a microwave? Well, there's only one way to find out.
In the 1980s, lobster was the ultimate in food bling. It graced the wedding banquet of Princess Diana, and as a nation, we spent over £200 million on shellfish alone. So it was only logical that for the flashiest of ingredients, you'd be able to cook it in the flashiest of gadgets.
I do find this very strange. This whole process is still going to take a good 15 minutes in the microwave because you've got to put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out. Making a lobster thermidor from scratch probably takes, say, half an hour max. Oh, bleeps off. Here I go. OK, next stage.
This recipe is the microwave version of the hokey cokey.
Back in the microwave.
It requires the dish to be put in and out of the microwave no less than 8 times.
Out it comes again. I could have floated my company in this time.
In the 80s, top-of-the-range microwaves cost over £800, and they were hailed as the start of kitchenless cookery, with the owner's profile being of a well-educated and sophisticated woman who thrives on activity. The question is, after all the activity of this recipe, what's it done to the lobster?
It tastes OK, but the lobster is just obliterated. Trying to cook something as refined and as expensive as lobster in a microwave is utterly pointless. But it does sum up the 80s. The 80s was all about style over substance. Now, that's great for them. But if I want to capture the essence of the 80s in my main course, I've got to look for inspiration elsewhere.
I still want to cook my lobster in an 80s style, but with such a delicate ingredient, blasting it in a microwave simply isn't going to work. So, instead, my idea is to turn for help to another must-have kitchen gadget of that decade.
Could I cook lobster with one of these? A coffee percolator.
Trust me on this one, it's not as crazy as it sounds. The 80s was all about showing off, and the coffee percolator was the perfect gadget for a time when instant coffee simply wasn't flash enough anymore. This simple machine passes boiling water through ground coffee in a filter into a glass bowl. This is a delicate way of brewing coffee, but I'm thinking, can I use this 1980s status symbol to help perfectly cook another very delicate ingredient, lobster?
To make myself not a cappuccino, but a lobstercino.
I start by putting a lobster bisque into the bit where you'd normally put the water.
In here, where you traditionally put the coffee, I'm going to put some herbs. I've chosen herbs here that are really delicate.
I've also got some raw lobster that I'm putting into the coffee bowl.
As the bisque drips through the herb infusion onto the lobster, it will gently cook it, thus leaving me with a delicately herb-flavoured lobster bisque with pieces of lobster in it. I have never done this before. This is a world first. This proper 80s bling show-off. I'm using a percolator and a lobster.
But is my strange idea going to work?
Right, that looks about done to me. But it's not a lobstercino. For that, I need to use one of these.
I've mixed some semi-skim milk with a bit more bisque and then just add steam.
So, some lobster pieces. There's my lobstercino froth for the top. So here is my first taste of lobstercino. It's delicious. Delicious. It's got the richness from the bisque. The texture of the soup is very velvety because it's gone through a fine filter from the percolator. Now the lobster pieces are incredibly delicate. They've not been overcooked. I call that a resounding success. Cheers, loads of money.
But a lobstercino on its own isn't a power lunch. I need to add more to this dish if I'm going to make it truly yuppie.
So the centre part of my power lunch has got to be the lobster. So I've cooked this in a bag. Boil in the bag was massive in the 80s. This is the modern-day version of boil in the bag. It's actually cooked very gently in the bag. This is an awful lot more delicate and gentler than a microwave.
I put lobster oil made from infusing tomatoes and roasted lobster carcasses into a hot pan.
Now this is called botaga, and it's the roe of a grey mullet that's been dried.
I fry the botaga and then baste the lobster. The nutty character of the roe will help accentuate the lobster flavour.
Literally rolling it in the botaga infused oil, taking it out. So there is the heart of my 1980s lobster power lunch. I now need a couple of garnishes to go with it.
I wasn't old enough in the 80s to do flash power lunches, so I want to combine my yuppie lobster with special versions of my favourite 80s teenage treats. Firstly, baked beans. To start, I've added to a pan a tomato sauce that I made by pressure cooking cherry tomatoes, to which I add borlotti beans and Spanish long beans. Then I add more of my lobster oil.
The final ingredient, this is the claw of the lobster. I'm going to add this last minute because I don't want the heat from the beans and the sauce to overcook the lobster.
For my second special 80s garnish, it's got to be a potato waffle. But for my version of this classic, I'm using whole potato. I simply push out the grid shapes and use my method of triple cooking the waffle to give it an extra special crunch.
Just out. Perfect. Here, I've got my microwave ready meal casing. There is my 1980s lobster power lunch.
To begin my power lunch experience, it's my special lobstercino percolator. The recipe is still the same as the successful dish I made by the seaside, but for one final touch, I've made the beast actually look like black coffee by mixing it with a dark lobster stock.
There's a quite thick smell of lobster in the air now, which I didn't think I'd ever say that while looking at a coffee percolator. This is a bit bizarre.
And in each diner's cup, I've also hidden a disc of gelled milk, so that when the lobster coffee is stirred in, it magically turns white.
Oh, it smells gorgeous.
Why have I messed it?
Then, to top it off, it's my special lobster squirty cream and a Rubik's Cube peppermill of ground coffee and vanilla.
That's genuine genius insanity. That's proper Heston. That's what I wanted. That's amazing.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, he's got lobster all down here.
You won't be going to the Groucho later.
I'm fine, thank you. I've now ruined my chances to be involved with the rest of the table.
Then it's time for my microwave power meal.
Is that actually cooking or is it for show?
Yeah, I think.
It actually works.
Oh, potato waffle!
Oh, fantastic.
That was exactly the nostalgic response I was hoping for. It's brilliant.
Lobster beans.
That's divine.
Mmm. Oh.
This is the lobsteringest day of my life, I think.
Absolutely delicious.
Absolutely unbelievable. It has got to that point now where kind of like, I think there's only so much surrealness and oddness that you can take before you start properly reeling.
I'm just trying to hold it together as best I can before the dessert comes and it turns out to be sort of a cake with Rick Astley in it. Or...
It's having fun with the idea of the 80s. But you've got to take yourself serious at some point, and this does. So it's a giggle with good food. Beautiful.
So I've managed to make a microwave meal worthy of the 1980s show-off culture. But next, I'm stepping out of this world. As in tribute to the space shuttle adventures of the 1980s, I attempt to make my own weightless dessert.
I don't think it's the easiest way to eat a Viennetta.
I'm on an adventure into the 1980s to use my favourite mad technology from my formative years to make an amazing feast for today. And now I want to turn my attention to my ultimate piece of 1980s technology and make a dessert inspired by the space shuttle.
In the 1980s, the space shuttle took its very first flight. Everyone got so excited about this, and people were saying that within 20 years we'll be living on the moon. Because of this, NASA pumped millions and millions of dollars into developing food that we could eat in zero gravity.
The quest for food that can be eaten in space has always fascinated me. Seeing grainy pictures of the Mercury astronauts in the 60s enduring tubes of paste food showed me just how tricky this challenge was. Then, in my childhood, the Apollo program saw the invention of the Space Bowl, which finally allowed the dining to improve to the standard of rehydrated prawn cocktails. By the time the space shuttle was launched in the 1980s, I was fully hooked on the great challenges that NASA faced making food that was both tasty and could be eaten in a weightless environment.
So, I'm thinking, is there any way that for my 1980s feast, I could give my guests a totally weightless dining experience?
This is about as weightless as you can get while still on Earth. A giant fan pushes up 150-mile-an-hour winds, which allow you to float. I'm coming here with sky-high ambitions. I've got a load of classic 80s desserts, and I'm hoping to somehow make both myself and the desserts weightless. This is one small step for chefs and one giant leap for 80s puddings. Right, so I've managed to get off the ground, but what about my desserts? Which 80s classic is best for zero-G eating?
Now, it's time for a bit of banoffee pie.
OK, so it's not quite NASA, but it's all about trial and error.
I think this might be a little bit more complicated than I first thought.
What about my favourite of 80s puds? Will I have more success with a Viennetta?
It was certainly good fun. I don't think it's the easiest way to eat a Viennetta. Maybe my idea of making my guests weightless was a little bit ambitious. But I'm now thinking, if I can get the shape of the food right and make it light enough, instead of making my guests weightless, I could possibly make my whole dessert weightless.
To do this, I'm actually going to turn to some space-age technology. I've come to Reading University, where they do a process called freeze-drying. Freeze-drying was a key advance for space food. It meant that it was possible to remove all of the liquid from the food, but still keep its taste and shape.
Now I'm thinking, if I could freeze-dry my 1980s desserts and remove all the moisture, could I make them light enough to float?
Freeze-drying is now used in all manner of foods and is the key to instant coffee, pot noodle and gravy granules. The process works by lowering the air pressure to a point that water can then be removed from a food as a gas rather than a solid. This allows the food to maintain its shape and taste, but with no moisture. The big question for me, though, is can it make my Viennetta light enough to float?
Come and have a look. Quick, in here. Now watch the slices of Viennetta. Look at them rising. It's like a couple of Viennetta soufflés. That's really aerated, isn't it? It's so delicate. Tastes completely like Viennetta. It's not cold, but it does taste like Viennetta. OK, are you ready for this? Here is my first attempt at a truly weightless Viennetta. It's so delicate. For a start, the air is just breaking the foam. I've also put some other desserts into freeze dry, so maybe they could be a little bit stronger. So
So next, I'm going to try using a piece of freeze-dried strawberry cheesecake.
So the idea is to try and make this round. If it's not really symmetrical and it's got too many kind of bits sticking out, I think the air's going to just catch on those bits and send the piece of food flying. 80s gatto grooming is here to stay.
Time to see if I can make a cheesecake float.
Floats. It's fantastic. I think I've landed on my own floating food moon.
So I've managed to make my freeze-dried food float, but I need to add a lot more to it if I'm going to have a full weightless dessert.
When you think about foods that are lighter than air, people refer to meringues. So this element of my dessert is based on a classic British meringue dish, Eton mess.
I'm using bananas rather than strawberries and sautéing them in caramelised sugar, rum and lemon juice.
What I want to try and achieve throughout this dessert is to trigger my guests' 80s memories, food memories. Whilst I'm not sure how many of them would have eaten mess, banoffee pie, I'm sure most of them would have had.
I then take the bananas from the pan and puree them. Whilst that cools, I whip some cream and add some lime juice.
OK, now I'm going to add some of the banana puree.
I then crumble some meringue into the mix and add some lime zest.
To house my kind of lighter than air meringue dessert in, I've got some of these. They're half moons.
And my moons are made from white chocolate. I fill the moons with the Eton mess, along with some sliced bananas and some praline.
If I was a slightly deluded, delirious child, this is what I think the moon would taste like.
But it's not a weightless dessert just yet.
So here, I've got a magnetic base with a puck-like disc, which is also a magnet, so it's being repelled, which means it looks like it's floating. So I am going to make my moon float in space.
So, to go with my floating moons, I need my special floating spheres. I've moved my design on since my experiments at the university. To increase the aerodynamics of my sphere, I'm using very thin chocolate shells, inside of which I'm putting a space-age version of raspberry cheesecake.
So instead of using fresh raspberries, I'm using freeze-dried ones. Freeze-dried fruit like this is exactly what astronauts would take up to space.
To give the cheesecake its cheesiness,
it's freeze-dried mascarpone. It's been ground to a powder.
And for an extra layer of space magic,
be something that reminded me of space in the 1980s, and that's space dust. Remember the popping candy? And this is going to bring extra element of surprise.
I seal the edges of the sphere together, give them a quick dust with edible shimmer powder, and then it's time to go weightless. For one final touch, I want to get 2 more of my favourite 80s desserts into my pud.
When I think of the 80s, there were 2 desserts that, for me, were just the best. Viennetta and tiramisu. So I was thinking, what if I combine the 2 and create a Viennetta misu?
To start, I've soaked sponge fingers in a mixture of masala wine and espresso coffee.
So I place this into the bottom of my glass, and you'll notice 80s. It's got to be a martini glass, isn't it?
Then I add my first sheet of bitter chocolate.
So these chocolate discs are going to form the crisp part of this dessert, just like in a Viennetta. And here, we've got a mixture of mascarpone cream, some lightly whipped cream, and some eggs and masala.
I build up my layers of masala, cream and discs of chocolate. finally, a dusting of cocoa.
And there is my 1980s inspired Viennetta Missou.
Back in the dining room, my guests have taken a quick break whilst we set up the table. Then it's time for them to return to their very own weightless pudding experience.
Oh my God!
Oh, it's hovering!
Oh my God, it's no rocks! It's no
Hey, look!
Look at that, that's so amazing.
Oh, I love this. This is amazing.
Yeah, thanks for leaving mine over there.
Use the force, Johnny. Trust your feelings.
I'm giving in to the dark side. I'm hungry.
Absolutely gorgeous.
I imagine this is exactly what it's like on the moon, yeah. Hence Neil Armstrong saying this is one small step for man, now I'm going to eat a lovely Viennetta. This is why America spends billions on its space programme, because everyone's just basically going up there and eating loads of tiramisu.
You only come expecting a unique experience, and then it surpasses. It just surpasses it for all the right reasons.
I had absolutely no fun in the 80s, and I've now basically managed to crunch an entire decade that at the time was miserable and hateful into an hour-long dinner, and I've really enjoyed it.
I officially love the 80s.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely fantastic.
This has been a hell of a challenge because my guests arrived hungry like a wolf, and then myself and my team worked till we're muscle-bound. But in the end, they loved it, and it's been...
Get me that Heston. Kenny's gone bloody mad.
I think it's Blumenthal that's the Mad Hatter here.
Balls, balls!
I might be the first chef that's put a testicle in Jermaine Greer's mouth.
Mmm, that is gorgeous.
Tomorrow, truffle snuffling, tart tatin and delicious markets as Jamie does the French Pyrenees at 9. On More 4 next, my father, Pablo Escobar, the Colombian drugs boss. But coming up tonight, gangsters and guns. It's shameless.